I came home from a 9-month deployment in Afghanistan to find someone else living in my house, and the HOA president standing on what used to be my front porch with a smug smile that made my blood boil. My name is Marcus Chen, and I bought my 3-bedroom ranch in Riverside, California back in 2022 when I was 28 years old. It was nothing fancy, but it was mine. I had saved every penny from my Army salary for 5 years to make that down payment. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly military families and retirees, with palm trees lining the streets and mountain views in the distance. The HOA seemed reasonable when I moved in. The fees were only $90 a month, and the rules seemed standard enough. Keep your lawn maintained, no cars on blocks in the driveway, that sort of thing. I should have paid more attention to the woman who introduced herself as Brenda during my first week there. She was the HOA president, a woman in her early 50s with that particular haircut that should have been a warning sign. You know the one. Short, blonde, with chunks and highlights, styled in that way that says she wants to speak to managers for sport. She wore velour tracksuits in various pastel colors and enormous sunglasses, even on cloudy days. Within 10 minutes of meeting me, she had already mentioned 3 different violations she had cited neighbors for, including someone who had the audacity to plant roses that were the wrong shade of pink. But I was polite, paid my fees on time, and kept my property looking good. My grass was always cut to exactly 2.5 inches, my mailbox was regulation black, and I made sure my trash cans were never visible from the street except on collection days. I thought I was being a model homeowner. Everything changed in March 2024 when I got my deployment orders. I was heading to Kandahar for 9 months, leaving in 2 weeks. I immediately started making arrangements. I set up automatic bill pay for everything, including the HOA fees. I arranged for a lawn service to come every 2 weeks. I even gave my neighbor, an older veteran named Tom Rodriguez, a key and power of attorney to handle anything that might come up while I was gone. Tom was a good guy, retired Marines, and he understood the military life. He promised to keep an eye on the place and deal with any issues. I paid 6 months of lawn service in advance and made sure every single bill was on auto-pay. I even prepaid my HOA fees for the entire 9 months, just to be absolutely certain there would be no problems. The day before I left, Brenda came knocking on my door with a clipboard. Of course she did. "Marcus, I heard you're deploying," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "I just want to make sure you understand that the HOA standards must be maintained even in your absence." "Everything is taken care of," I told her, explaining about the lawn service and Tom having power of attorney. Her eyes narrowed when I mentioned Tom. Tom Rodriguez. He's been on thin ice with the HOA himself. Last month his garbage can was visible from the street on a Thursday. "Collection day is Friday," I said, confused. "Exactly, he put it out a day early." "That's a violation." She made a note on her clipboard. "I'm not sure he's the best choice to manage your property. He's a retired Marine with 40 years of home ownership experience." "I trust him completely," she sniffed. "Well, just make sure everything stays in compliance. The HOA doesn't make exceptions, even for deployed service members. If violations occur, they will be addressed accordingly." Something about the way she said it made my skin crawl, but I was leaving in 12 hours and had a million things to do. I thanked her curtly and closed the door. The deployment itself was rough. We were doing convoy security and base patrol, and there were several close calls with wides. The internet connection was spotty at best, and I could usually only check my email once a week if I was lucky. Tom sent me updates every few weeks. Everything was fine. The lawn service was doing their job, the house was secure, no problems. Then in August, about 6 months into my deployment, I stopped hearing from Tom. I sent 3 emails over the course of 2 weeks with no response. I tried calling, but the time difference and my limited phone access made it nearly impossible. I finally managed to get through to his cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail every time. I started to worry, but what could I do from 8,000 miles away? I asked another neighbor, a guy named Steve who lived 2 doors down, if he could check on Tom. Steve emailed me back a week later saying Tom had fallen and broken his hip. He was in a rehabilitation facility and would be there for at least another month. My stomach dropped. I immediately tried to call the lawn service, but I couldn't get through. I sent emails, but got no response. The time difference and communication limitations were making everything impossible. I was stuck in Afghanistan, trying to do my job while worrying about what was happening at home. In September, I got a brief email from Steve. It just said, "Man, you need to call home ASAP. Something is going on with your house." That was it. No details, no explanation. I tried everything to get more information, but Steve didn't respond to my follow-up emails. I couldn't reach Tom. I couldn't get calls out. For 3 weeks, I lost sleep every night wondering what was happening. Finally, in late September, I managed to get a call through to Tom's rehab facility. The nurse said he was doing better, but still couldn't come to the phone. I explained the situation and begged her to have him call me or email me. 2 days later, I got an email from Tom that made my blood run cold. "Marcus, I'm so sorry. I've been trying to get a lawyer involved, but I'm stuck in this place. Brenda from the HOA has been putting liens on your house. She's claiming you abandoned the property, and there are all these violations. The lawn service stopped coming in July because someone canceled the contract. I don't know who. I tried to go over and mow it myself before my accident, but it was already getting bad. By the time I got out of the hospital, there were notices all over your door. I can't do much from here, but I'm trying. Call a lawyer as soon as you can." I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. I immediately tried to call the HOA, but again, impossible from where I was. I sent emails to Brenda Hutchins at the HOA email address listed on the documents I had. No response. I sent certified letters. I sent emails explaining I was deployed, providing my military orders, asking what was happening. Nothing. I contacted a lawyer in Riverside through email, a guy named Robert Jameson who specialized in HOA disputes. He agreed to look into it and asked for a retainer, which I paid immediately through wire transfer. 2 weeks went by before I heard from him again. When I did, the news was worse than I could have imagined. "Mr. Chen, I'm afraid the situation is quite serious," his email read. "The HOA has placed multiple liens on your property for alleged violations and unpaid fines. According to their records, your property has been in violation of the following: unmaintained lawn exceeding 4 inches in height, peeling paint on the mailbox post, trash cans visible from the street, and failure to respond to HOA correspondence. The fines have accumulated to approximately $18,000. Furthermore, Miss Hutchins claims she sent multiple certified letters to your address which went unanswered, and therefore the HOA board voted to foreclose on the property. They are claiming abandonment." I read that email 5 times, sitting in a dusty tent in Kandahar, and I wanted to scream. $18,000 in fines. Foreclose. I had paid my HOA fees through the entire deployment. I had hired a lawn service. I had someone with power of attorney, and I had definitely not received any certified letters because I was in a war zone. Robert's email continued. "I need you to understand that California law does provide some protections for active duty service members under the Service Members Civil Relief Act, which should prevent this kind of action. However, the HOA is claiming they were unaware of your military status. I have now informed them and sent copies of your deployment orders. I have also filed an emergency motion to halt any foreclosure proceedings. However, I must tell you that according to county records, the foreclosure sale is scheduled for October 15th. That's in 12 days. 12 days. I had 12 days before the house I had spent 5 years saving for would be sold out from under me while I was deployed in a combat zone. I went to my commanding officer immediately. Captain Williams was a good man, and when I explained the situation, he looked furious. "This is exactly the kind of thing the SCRA is supposed to prevent," he said. "Let me see what I can do." He got on the phone with JAG, the Judge Advocate General's office, and they confirmed that what the HOA was doing was likely illegal. They sent official letters on my behalf. They contacted Robert and provided additional documentation, but the bureaucracy moved slowly and I was running out of time. The next week was a nightmare. I was trying to focus on my job, which involved keeping people alive in a hostile environment, while simultaneously fighting a battle 8,000 miles away with spotty internet and a 10.5-hour time difference. Robert managed to get a temporary restraining order that delayed the sale by 1 week. But the judge in Riverside wanted me to appear in person for a hearing, which was impossible. I was in Afghanistan. I couldn't just hop on a plane and come home for a court date. JAG provided a declaration explaining this, and the judge reluctantly agreed to proceed without me, but he made it clear he wasn't happy about it. Robert said the hearing didn't go well. Brenda showed up with an HOA attorney, a slick guy named Dennis Porter, and they had a stack of documentation 3 inches thick. They have photos of your property showing the lawn overgrown, they have copies of violation notices, they have records of certified mail attempts, Robert told me over a crackling phone connection. They're claiming they followed all the proper procedures. The judge seemed skeptical of their claims that they didn't know you were deployed, especially after I showed him that your military status is public record, and you had informed the HOA before you left. But Miss Hutchins testified under oath that you never told her anything about a deployment. "That's a lie," I shouted into the phone. "I told her the day before I left." She came to my house with a clipboard and specifically mentioned the deployment. "I believe you, but it's your word against hers right now, and you're not here to testify." The judge continued the case for 2 more weeks to allow you to provide additional evidence or testimony. "But Marcus, I have to tell you, if we can't stop this in 2 weeks, they're going to proceed with the sale." I was losing my mind. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I was making mistakes at work, and Captain Williams noticed. He pulled me aside and told me he was going to do something unusual. "I'm sending you home early," he said. "Emergency leave. This situation qualifies. You need to be there to fight this, and you can't do it from here." I could have hugged him. The paperwork took 3 days to process, which felt like 3 years, but finally I was on a transport plane headed to Germany, then another flight to Los Angeles. The entire trip took 36 hours and I didn't sleep a minute of it. When I finally landed at LAX, I looked like hell. I hadn't shaved in 2 days. I was wearing my uniform, and I probably smelled like a combination of jet fuel and stress sweat. I rented a car and drove straight to Riverside, which took 90 minutes in traffic. It was late afternoon when I pulled onto my street. What I saw made me slam on the brakes in the middle of the road. My house had a sold sign in the yard, not for sale, sold. I sat there for a full 30 seconds, just staring at it, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. Then I saw movement on the porch. A woman I had never seen before was watering plants in pots by the front door, my front door. I pulled into the driveway and got out of the car. The woman looked up, confused. "Can I help you?" she asked. "This is my house," I said, my voice coming out strangled. "What are you doing here?" Her confusion turned to concern. I'm sorry, but you must be mistaken. I bought this house 3 days ago. The sale was final yesterday. Before I could respond, I heard the click-clack of heels on the sidewalk. I turned, and there she was. Brenda Hutchins, wearing a lavender velour tracksuit and oversized sunglasses, carrying her ever-present clipboard, with that smile that I now recognized as pure malice. "Marcus Chen," she said, as if greeting an old friend. "I heard you might be coming back early. I'm afraid you're trespassing. This property is no longer yours. It was sold at a legal foreclosure auction to satisfy the substantial debts you owed to the HOA. I stepped toward her, and she actually stepped back. Good. I was 6'2" and in the best shape of my life from 9 months of military physical training, and I was so angry I was shaking. "You sold my house while I was deployed," I said, each word coming out like a bullet. "That's illegal. You violated the Service Members' Civil Relief Act." "We had no knowledge of your military service," she said, and I could hear the rehearsed quality of the statement. "You failed to inform the HOA of your absence, you failed to maintain your property, and you failed to respond to numerous attempts at contact. The HOA followed all legal procedures. I told you I was deploying the day before I left. You came to my house. You saw me in my uniform." "I don't recall any such conversation," she said smoothly. "And even if such a conversation occurred, verbal notification isn't sufficient. The HOA bylaws require written notice of any absence exceeding 30 days. I sent emails. I sent letters. I had Tom Rodriguez handling everything with power of attorney. Mr. Rodriguez is not a party to your HOA agreement, and we received no such correspondence from you." She adjusted her sunglasses. "The sale was legal, final, and binding. I suggest you remove your vehicle from this property before I call the police for trespassing." The new homeowner on the porch was looking increasingly nervous. "I'm sorry," she said to me. "I didn't know any of this. The real estate agent said it was a normal foreclosure sale. I paid cash." "I have a deed." I looked at her, and I could see she was telling the truth. She was a victim in this too, just not the same way I was. "What did you pay for it?" I asked. $65,000. My house was worth at least $320,000. They had sold it for a fifth of its value. I pulled out my phone and called Robert Jameson. He answered on the second ring. "I'm at my house," I said. "Someone else is living here. Brenda says the sale went through 3 days ago." There was a long pause. "That's impossible." "We had a restraining order." "Well, apparently it wasn't impossible because there's a woman on my porch who says she bought my house 3 days ago. Stay there. Don't go anywhere." "I'm 40 minutes away." He hung up. I looked at Brenda. "My lawyer is on his way," she smiled. "That's fine. I'm sure he'll explain to you that everything was done legally." The restraining order only delayed the sale. When the judge lifted it after the continued hearing, the sale proceeded as scheduled. You weren't there to contest it, so the judge allowed it to go forward. "I was in Afghanistan. That's not the HOA's problem." She made a note on her clipboard. "Now, as I said, you're trespassing. You have 10 minutes to remove your vehicle before I call the sheriff." I wanted to do something I would have regretted, but years of military discipline kept me in check. Instead, I got back in my car and parked on the street, making sure I was on public property. Then I sat there, staring at my house while I waited for Robert. The new homeowner went inside, probably to call someone. Brenda stood on the sidewalk for a few more minutes, then walked away with a satisfied smile. I watched her go to a house 3 doors down. Her house, I assumed. When Robert arrived, he looked at the sold sign and his face went pale. "This shouldn't have happened," he said. "The judge was supposed to wait for your return." Well, he didn't. We went to the county recorder's office, which was thankfully still open for another hour. Robert pulled the records, and his expression got darker with every page he read. "This is bad," he finally said. The sale went through 3 days ago, just like she said. The purchaser is a woman named Linda McCarthy. She paid $65,000 in cash. The deed was recorded yesterday. How is that legal? I'm active duty military. I was deployed. This is exactly what the SCRA prevents. You're absolutely right. The problem is the judge who lifted the restraining order. Look at this. He showed me a document. Judge Martin Pearson. He's been on the bench for 30 years and he's known for being very pro-HOA. He's ruled that the SCRA doesn't apply because the HOA claims they weren't aware of your military status until after the foreclosure process had already begun. That's garbage. I have proof I told Brenda I was deploying. What kind of proof? I opened my mouth and then closed it. What proof did I have? The conversation had been verbal. I hadn't sent a follow-up email specifically to the HOA address because I thought telling the president in person was sufficient. I had sent my attorney the deployment orders, but that was months after the conversation with Brenda. I have Tom Rodriguez, I said. I gave him power of attorney specifically to deal with the HOA if needed. The power of attorney document, was it filed with the HOA? I don't know, it should have been. Tom was supposed to handle everything. Robert sighed. Tom had a medical emergency. It's possible he never filed it. Without a filed POA, the HOA can claim they had no authorized person to contact. We spent the next 2 hours going through every document. Robert requested copies of everything the HOA had filed, every notice they claimed to have sent, every piece of their supposed documentation. What we found was damning, but not in the way they intended. Look at this, Robert said, pointing to a series of violation notices. These are dated starting in July. The first one is July 8th, claiming your lawn was overgrown, but look at the photo they attached. I looked. It showed my house with a lawn that was maybe 3 inches high, perfectly normal. They claim that's overgrown. The HOA rules say lawns must be maintained between 2 and 4 inches. This is clearly within compliance. He flipped to the next one. July 22nd, another notice. The lawn is maybe 4 inches here, still within compliance. August 5th, now here the lawn is actually overgrown, probably 5 or 6 inches. That's when Tom had his accident, I said. The lawn service had stopped coming. I found out later someone called and canceled the contract. Who canceled it? I don't know, the company wouldn't tell me. But I didn't cancel it and Tom didn't cancel it. Robert made a note. We need to find that out. If the HOA or Brenda canceled it to manufacture violations, that's fraud. We kept going through the documents. The more we found, the angrier Robert got. Look at these fines. They're charging you $500 per violation. But the HOA bylaws clearly state that fines start at $50 for a first offense and increase with repeated violations. They jumped straight to $500. Can they do that? No. Not legally, and look at this. He showed me another document. They claim they sent you 12 certified letters, but there are only 9 tracking numbers here, and when I look them up. He typed on his laptop. 3 of them show as undeliverable, not refused, not unclaimed, but undeliverable. That means they had an incorrect address. What address did they use? He showed me. They had sent them to my house address, which should have been correct, but Tom should have been able to collect them since he had my POA. Except 3 of them had the wrong ZIP code, off by 1 digit. That's not an accident, I said. No, it's not. Robert was getting excited now in the way lawyers do when they find smoking guns. And look at the foreclosure notice. They're required by California law to wait at least 30 days after the final notice before proceeding with a sale. The final notice is dated September 1st, and the sale was held October 18th. That's 47 days, so they're clear there. But the final notice has to be sent by certified mail and posted on the property. There's no proof of posting. How do we prove they didn't post it? We can't definitively, but we can cast doubt. Do you have any photos of your property from that time period? I shook my head, then stopped. Wait, Tom might. He said he went over to check on the place before his accident, and Steve, my other neighbor, he was keeping an eye on things too. Get those photos. If they show no posting on the door during that time period, it helps our case. We left the recorder's office and I drove to Tom's house. He was back from rehab, and when he answered the door, he looked terrible. He had lost weight and aged 10 years in the last few months. Marcus, he said, and I could see tears in his eyes. I'm so sorry, I tried to stop this. I tried. I know you did, Tom. It's not your fault. I came inside and explained what we had found. Do you have any photos of my house from August or September? He nodded slowly. I took a few before my accident, trying to document that things weren't as bad as Brenda was claiming. Let me find my phone. He came back with his phone and showed me the photos. There were 5 of them, dated August 2nd, about 3 days before his fall. They showed my house from various angles. The lawn was getting long, maybe 5 inches, but not terrible. More importantly, the front door was clearly visible in 2 of the photos. There were no notices posted on it. Tom, these are dated August 2nd. Can you confirm that's accurate? Yes. I know because it was the day after my grandson's birthday. I remember because I had been at his party the day before. And you're sure there were no notices on my door? Positive. I went right up to the door to check. I even have a photo of the door handle, see? He scrolled to another photo that showed the doorknob close-up. I was going to open it and check inside, but I realized I had forgotten your key at home. So I went back to get it, and that's when I fell on my own front steps like an idiot. Robert was grinning now. Mr. Rodriguez, would you be willing to testify to all of this in court? Absolutely. Brenda Hutchins has been a menace to this neighborhood for 5 years. If I can help take her down, I'll do it gladly. We thanked Tom and went to Steve's house next. Steve was a software engineer who worked from home, and he confirmed that he had also been keeping an eye on my place. I've got something better than photos, Steve said. I've got video. He pulled up his home security system on his computer. My cameras cover my front yard, driveway, and part of the street. One of them has a partial view of your driveway and front door. Let me check the footage. He scrolled back through months of footage, and sure enough, we could see my house in the corner of the frame. The resolution wasn't great, but it was good enough to see that there were no notices posted on my door through most of August. Then, on August 18th, a figure appeared in the footage. That's Brenda, I said, recognizing the tracksuit and the walk. We watched as she walked up to my door and posted something on it. She stood there for a moment, took a photo with her phone, then left. So she did post a notice, Robert said. Wait, Steve said. Watch what happens next. About 30 minutes later in the footage, Brenda came back. She walked up to the door, removed the notice, and left. Holy hell, Robert said. Did she just create a photo op and then remove the notice so you wouldn't see it? We watched more footage. Over the next few weeks, the same pattern repeated 3 times. Brenda would post a notice, take photos, then remove it within an hour or 2. That's fraud, Robert said, his voice full of satisfaction. That's deliberate, intentional fraud. She was creating false documentation. Can we use this in court? I asked. Absolutely, and we're going to do more than that. We're going to file criminal charges. Over the next 2 days, Robert filed an emergency motion to set aside the foreclosure sale based on fraud and SCRA violations. He included all the evidence we had gathered. The photos from Tom, the video footage from Steve, the documentation showing improper fines, the incorrectly addressed certified letters, everything. He also contacted the district attorney's office and filed a formal complaint about Brenda's actions. The DA wasn't immediately interested until Robert showed them the video footage of Brenda posting and removing notices. That got their attention. The hearing was set for November 3rd, 2 weeks after I got home. Judge Pearson was assigned to the case, which worried me, but Robert said we had enough evidence that even a pro-HOA judge couldn't ignore it. In the meantime, I had nowhere to live. I was staying in a hotel, watching someone else live in my house, and spending every day gathering more evidence. We subpoenaed the lawn service company and found out that, yes, someone had called to cancel my service in early July. The customer service representative who took the call said it was a woman who identified herself as my wife and said we were moving and no longer needed the service. I had never been married. We got the phone number the call came from. It was the HOA office number. We subpoenaed the HOA's phone records. On July 2nd, there was a 3-minute call from the HOA office to the lawn service company. We also found that Brenda had been the one who purchased the house at the foreclosure auction, through an LLC she controlled. She had then immediately flipped it to Linda McCarthy, the current occupant, for $65,000. But the property was worth over $300,000. Why would she sell it so cheap if she was trying to steal it? I asked Robert. She needed a clean buyer with no connection to her. If she kept the property, it would be obvious she had engineered the whole thing for her own benefit. By selling it immediately to a third party for cash, she could claim she was just following HOA procedures, and the buyer at the auction happened to be her LLC. The low price makes it less suspicious than if she had sold it for full market value immediately. But she still made money on it. Oh yes, the foreclosure sale. She bought your house for $20,000. I felt sick. $20,000. The opening bid was the amount of the liens plus costs. $18,000 in fraudulent fines, plus about $2,000 in legal fees and administrative costs. No one else bid because these foreclosure auctions are barely advertised. She bought it for $20,000, sold it for $65,000, made a $45,000 profit. Meanwhile, you lost a house worth $320,000. That's theft. Yes, it is. And we're going to prove it. The day of the hearing finally arrived. I wore my dress uniform, which Robert had advised. Let the judge see your active duty military, he said. Let him see exactly what the SCRA is meant to protect. The courtroom was small, just a regular civil courtroom in Riverside County Superior Court. Judge Pearson was an older man with gray hair and a stern expression. Brenda was there with her attorney, Dennis Porter, who looked far too confident. Linda McCarthy, the woman who had bought my house, was also there. She looked miserable, and I almost felt bad for her. She had just wanted to buy a house, and now she was caught in the middle of this mess. Robert stood up when the judge called the case. Your Honor, we are here today to request that the court set aside the foreclosure sale of my client's property based on multiple violations of the Service Members Civil Relief Act, as well as fraud perpetrated by the HOA president, Brenda Hutchins. Judge Pearson looked skeptical. Counselor, this court already heard arguments on this matter and allowed the sale to proceed. What new evidence are you presenting? Substantial evidence, Your Honor. Evidence that was not available at the previous hearing because my client was deployed in Afghanistan and unable to fully investigate. We have video evidence showing Ms. Hutchins engaging in fraud, witness testimony, and documentation proving that the HOA violated its own bylaws as well as California foreclosure law. That got the judge's attention. Video evidence of fraud, that's a serious accusation. Yes, Your Honor, we have security camera footage showing Ms. Hutchins posting violation notices on my client's property, photographing them, and then removing them within hours to prevent my client's designated representative from seeing them. She created false documentation to support illegal fines and foreclosure. Dennis Porter jumped to his feet. Your Honor, this is outrageous. Ms. Hutchins followed all proper HOA procedures. The HOA had no knowledge that Mr. Chen was deployed until months after the process began. Robert smiled. Your Honor, we also have testimony from Mr. Chen that he personally informed Miss Hutchins of his deployment the day before he left. We have emails my client sent to the HOA. We have documentation showing that Miss Hutchins canceled my client's lawn service to manufacture violations. And we have evidence that Miss Hutchins personally profited from this foreclosure. By purchasing the property through an LLC, she controls and immediately reselling it for a profit. The judge's expression changed. He was paying attention now. You're saying the HOA president bought the foreclosed property herself? Through an LLC, yes, Your Honor. She purchased it at the foreclosure auction for $20,000 and sold it 3 days later for $65,000 to Miss McCarthy, who is present in the courtroom today and was an innocent purchaser with no knowledge of any of this. Judge Pearson looked at Brenda, and his skepticism had turned to suspicion. Miss Hutchins, is this true? Did you purchase this property? Brenda's attorney answered. Your Honor, Miss Hutchins' investment company purchased the property at a legal foreclosure auction. There was nothing improper about it. The auction was properly noticed and open to any bidder. But Miss Hutchins is the HOA president who initiated the foreclosure. That's irrelevant, Your Honor. The HOA board voted on the foreclosure, not just Miss Hutchins. Robert spoke up. Your Honor, we've also subpoenaed the HOA board meeting minutes. The vote to foreclose was 3-2 with Miss Hutchins providing the deciding vote. The 2 board members who voted against it have provided declarations stating that Miss Hutchins misrepresented the facts of the case to the board, telling them that Mr. Chen had abandoned the property when she knew he was deployed. I'd like to see all of this evidence, the judge said, and I'd like to hear testimony. Mr. Chen, please take the stand. I was sworn in and spent the next 30 minutes telling my story. I explained about buying the house, getting deployment orders, telling Brenda I was deploying, setting up the lawn service and giving Tom power of attorney, and then what happened while I was gone. Dennis Porter cross-examined me, trying to make it seem like I had been irresponsible and hadn't properly notified the HOA. But Robert had prepared me well, and I stayed calm and factual. Then Tom testified. He explained about keeping an eye on my house, his accident, and the photos he had taken showing no notices on my door. Steve testified next and provided the video footage. The judge watched it 3 times, and each time his expression got darker. Miss Hutchins, I'm going to give you an opportunity to explain this, Judge Pearson said. The video clearly shows you posting notices and then removing them a short time later. Why? Brenda stood up, and for the first time since I had known her, she looked uncertain. Your Honor, sometimes the weather would be bad and I would remove notices to protect them, then repost them later. The video shows clear weather every time, the judge said flatly. Try again. Dennis Porter whispered something to her urgently. She shook her head. I don't recall the specific circumstances of each visit to the property. I was following HOA procedures. The procedures that required you to post notice but apparently not to leave them posted. Your Honor, I object to this line of questioning, Dennis said. Miss Hutchins is not on trial here. Not yet, the judge said, and I saw Brenda go pale. But she may be soon. This court is deeply troubled by what it's seeing. Mr. Jameson, what are you requesting? Robert stood. Your Honor, we are requesting that the court set aside the foreclosure sale as void due to SCRA violations and fraud. We are requesting that the property be returned to Mr. Chen. We are also requesting that the court award damages for Mr. Chen's expenses, emotional distress, and the value of the property. What about Miss McCarthy? She purchased the property in good faith. Linda McCarthy's attorney, who had been sitting quietly, spoke up. Your Honor, my client is willing to return the property in exchange for a full refund of her purchase price, plus her closing costs and moving expenses. She had no knowledge of any impropriety and just wants to be made whole. The judge nodded. That seems reasonable. Miss Hutchins, did you profit from this transaction? Dennis Porter answered again. Your Honor, that's not relevant to whether the foreclosure was proper. It's absolutely relevant to whether there was fraud, the judge snapped. Answer the question. Did your client profit from purchasing this property and immediately reselling it? There was a long pause. Finally, Brenda said quietly, I made approximately $45,000. The courtroom was silent. Judge Pearson stared at her for a long moment. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, he said slowly. You, as HOA president, initiated a foreclosure on an active-duty service member's home while he was deployed in Afghanistan. You manufactured violations by canceling his lawn service. You posted violation notices and removed them to create false documentation. You assessed illegal fines in violation of your own HOA bylaws. You then purchased the property yourself at the foreclosure auction for a fraction of its value and immediately sold it for a profit of $45,000. Is that accurate? Brenda didn't answer. Her attorney said, Your Honor, I'd like to request a recess to consult with my client. Denied. I've heard enough. Judge Pearson looked at me. Mr. Chen, thank you for your service. This court is appalled at what has happened to you. The foreclosure sale is hereby set aside as void. The property will be returned to you immediately. Miss McCarthy, you will be fully refunded by Miss Hutchins personally. Your Honor, we object, Dennis Porter said. The HOA purchased the property, not Miss Hutchins personally. The HOA didn't profit. Miss Hutchins did. She can pay Miss McCarthy back from her ill-gotten gains. The judge looked at Brenda with disgust. Miss Hutchins, this court is imposing sanctions on you personally in the amount of $100,000, payable to Mr. Chen for the emotional distress, expenses, and damages caused by your fraudulent actions. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution. The evidence shows fraud, theft, and violations of the SCRA, which is a federal crime. Brenda's face had gone white. Your Honor, please, I can't afford. You should have thought of that before you stole a deployed soldier's home. Bailiff, please ensure that Miss Hutchins doesn't leave the jurisdiction. I'm going to ask the DA to consider this a flight risk given the severity of the fraud. He banged his gavel. This case is closed. The property is returned to Mr. Chen effective immediately. Miss Hutchins has 30 days to refund Miss McCarthy's purchase price plus expenses, and 90 days to pay the sanctions to Mr. Chen. If she fails to do so, I will hold her in contempt and issue a warrant for her arrest. I sat there in shock as the judge left the courtroom. Robert was grinning and shaking my hand. Tom was wiping tears from his eyes. Even Linda McCarthy looked relieved. Brenda stood there, and for the first time since I had met her, she looked small, defeated. Her attorney was already packing up his briefcase with the air of someone who wanted to get as far away as possible. Congratulations, Robert said. Your house is yours again. The district attorney's office moved quickly once they saw the evidence. Within a week, Brenda Hutchins was arrested and charged with fraud, grand theft, and violations of the Service Members Civil Relief Act. The federal charges were particularly serious, carrying potential prison time of up to 5 years. Linda McCarthy moved out of my house, and I moved back in. She was nice about it, understanding that she had been a victim of Brenda's scheme as much as I was. I even helped her move some of her furniture out, feeling guilty even though none of it was my fault. The inside of my house was actually in better shape than when I had left it. Linda had painted and done some upgrades. Keep it, she said when I offered to help her restore it to how it was. I'm just glad to get my money back. Brenda couldn't afford to pay Linda back immediately, and she couldn't afford the $100,000 in sanctions either. The court put a lien on her house, the one 3 doors down from me. She was forced to sell it to pay her debts. The bitter irony wasn't lost on anyone in the neighborhood. The HOA president who had stolen my house through foreclosure lost her own house to pay me back. The criminal case moved forward over the next several months. I had to testify at her trial, which was held in March 2025, about 6 months after I had come home from deployment. Brenda's defense attorney tried to paint her as an overzealous HOA president who had made mistakes but hadn't committed crimes. The jury didn't buy it. The video footage of her posting and removing notices was damning. The evidence that she had canceled my lawn service was damning. The fact that she had profited from the foreclosure was damning. And the testimony from other homeowners in the neighborhood, who came forward after the case became public, revealed that this wasn't the first time Brenda had abused her HOA power. 3 other families had been targeted with excessive fines and threats of foreclosure. One elderly couple had paid nearly $10,000 in bogus fines to avoid losing their home. A single mother had been fined repeatedly for her children's toys being visible in the yard, with Brenda claiming it was visual clutter that violated HOA rules. The jury found Brenda guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 3 years in prison and ordered her to pay full restitution to me and the other families she had defrauded. The total came to over $200,000. Her house sold for $380,000. After paying off her mortgage and the court-ordered restitution, she had almost nothing left. The HOA itself was also held liable in a civil lawsuit that Robert filed on behalf of me and the other affected families. The HOA's insurance paid out a substantial settlement, and the entire HOA board was forced to resign. The neighborhood voted to dramatically reform the HOA rules and implement oversight to prevent this kind of abuse from ever happening again. Tom Rodriguez was elected as the new HOA president. His first act was to reduce the maximum fine for any violation to $100 and require a vote of the full board before any foreclosure action could even be considered. He also implemented a rule that all HOA correspondence had to be documented with photos and multiple methods of contact. As for me, I stayed in my house. I eventually left the Army after my enlistment was up, having had enough of deployments and the stress that came with them. I got a job as an engineer at a defense contractor in Riverside and settled into civilian life. Every time I pull into my driveway, I feel grateful. Grateful that I had good neighbors like Tom and Steve who looked out for me. Grateful that I had a good lawyer in Robert. Grateful that the judge, despite his reputation, saw through the fraud and did the right thing. And grateful that the system, slow and imperfect as it is, eventually worked. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Brenda was released from prison after serving 18 months. She moved out of state, somewhere in Arizona, and I never saw her again. I hope she learned something from the experience, but I doubt it. People like that rarely do. The sold sign that had been planted in my yard, the one I saw when I first came home, is now stored in my garage. I kept it as a reminder of how close I came to losing everything, and how important it is to fight for what's right even when the odds seem impossible. Linda McCarthy and I became friends, oddly enough. She felt terrible about the whole situation even though it wasn't her fault. She bought another house a few miles away, and we still get coffee sometimes and laugh about the absurdity of the whole thing. The neighborhood is quieter now. The HOA still exists, but it's functional rather than tyrannical. They focus on actual community improvement rather than petty enforcement and power trips. Tom makes sure of that. I sometimes think about what would have happened if I hadn't come home when I did. If Captain Williams hadn't sent me back on emergency leave, if Robert hadn't been such a good lawyer, if Steve hadn't had security cameras, if Tom hadn't taken photos before his accident, any one of those things could have gone differently, and I might have lost everything. A house I had spent 5 years saving for, gone because of one vindictive person's greed and abuse of power. But I also think about the other families that Brenda had targeted. The elderly couple who paid $10,000 they couldn't afford. The single mother harassed over toys in her yard. How many others were there who never came forward? How many people gave up rather than fight because it seemed too hard or too expensive? That's what people like Brenda count on. They count on people being too tired, too busy, too overwhelmed to fight back. They count on being able to hide behind rules and procedures and paperwork. They count on their victims not having the resources or knowledge to challenge them. But sometimes they pick the wrong victim. Sometimes they target someone who has the stubbornness, the support system, and the sheer determination to fight back no matter how long it takes. I was that person, and I'm grateful for it. Not just for myself, but for everyone else who might have been victimized if Brenda had gotten away with stealing my house. The Service Members Civil Relief Act exists for a reason. Men and women who serve in the military shouldn't have to worry about losing their homes while they're deployed. They shouldn't have to fight a war overseas and then come home to fight another war in court just to reclaim what's rightfully theirs. What Brenda did wasn't just illegal, it was morally repugnant. She targeted someone who was serving their country, who couldn't defend themselves because they were literally in a combat zone. She manufactured violations, created false documentation, and stole a home for personal profit. And she lost everything because of it. Her home, her reputation, her freedom, and every penny she thought she had gained. There's a certain poetic justice in that, even if it doesn't fully make up for the months of stress and fear I experienced. I still have nightmares sometimes about getting that email from Tom while I was in Afghanistan. The feeling of helplessness, being 8,000 miles away and unable to do anything while someone stole everything I had worked for. The constant worry, the inability to sleep, the distraction from my job that could have gotten someone killed. But those nightmares are getting less frequent. Time heals and justice helps. Knowing that Brenda faced consequences for what she did, that she went to prison and lost everything, provides a sense of closure that many victims never get. The legal system is slow and often frustrating. There were times during the case when I wanted to give up, when it seemed like too much money and too much energy for an uncertain outcome. Robert's bills were adding up, I was living in a hotel, and Brenda's lawyer was fighting every step of the way. But we kept going. We gathered evidence, we built our case, and we presented it to a judge who was willing to look past his preconceptions and see the truth. Judge Pearson could have sided with the HOA despite the evidence. He could have decided that technically the procedures were followed even if they were unethical. But he didn't. He saw the fraud for what it was and acted accordingly. That gives me hope. Hope that the system can work when people are willing to fight for it. Hope that justice is possible even when it seems impossible. Hope that predators like Brenda can be stopped before they destroy more lives. The neighborhood has changed since everything happened. People are more aware now, more willing to question authority and push back against unfair treatment. The HOA meetings, which used to be attended by only a handful of people, now regularly draw 30 or 40 homeowners. People pay attention to what's being discussed and voted on. Tom has been a great president. He actually cares about the community rather than power and control. Under his leadership, the HOA has fixed streetlights, organized neighborhood events, and even negotiated a better deal on the landscaping contract for the common areas. He's shown what an HOA is supposed to be. a genuine association of homeowners working together for mutual benefit. It's funny how one person's greed and cruelty led to positive changes for the entire community. Brenda's scheme to steal my house ended up destroying her and reforming the HOA. If she had just left me alone, just followed the actual rules and treated me fairly, she'd still be living in her house 3 doors down. She'd still have her freedom, her money, her reputation. But she couldn't help herself. She saw an opportunity for profit and power, and she took it without caring who she hurt. That's the mindset of a bully and a thief, and it finally caught up with her. I've been asked several times if I forgive her. The honest answer is I don't know. Forgiveness is complicated. What she did caused me enormous stress and nearly destroyed my financial future. The months of worry while I was deployed, the humiliation of coming home to find someone else living in my house, the exhausting legal battle, the expense, the emotional toll on me and everyone who helped me fight back. Can I forgive that? Should I? I don't know if forgiveness is even the right concept here. What I feel now is mostly relief that it's over and satisfaction that justice was served. I don't wish Brenda harm, but I don't particularly care about her well-being either. She's no longer part of my life, and I intend to keep it that way. What I do know is that I've learned important lessons from this experience. I learned the value of good neighbors and good friends. Tom and Steve didn't have to help me. They could have stayed out of it, avoided the hassle and the potential conflict with the HOA, but they stepped up because it was the right thing to do. I learned the importance of documentation. If Steve hadn't had those security cameras, we wouldn't have had the video evidence that ultimately proved fraud. If Tom hadn't taken those photos, we wouldn't have been able to prove that Brenda was lying about posting notices. I learned that fighting back is possible even when it seems hopeless. There were so many times I could have given up. When I was in Afghanistan and couldn't get information or make phone calls, when the first hearing went badly, when I saw the sold sign in my yard. But I kept fighting, and it made all the difference. And I learned that the law, for all its flaws and complications, can be a powerful tool for justice when wielded by people who understand it and believe in it. Robert could have taken my retainer and done the minimum. Instead, he threw himself into the case, spent hours gathering evidence, and fought for me as hard as I was fighting for myself. These lessons have value beyond just my situation. They're applicable to anyone facing injustice or abuse of power. Document everything. Build your support network. Find good professional help. And never give up, no matter how bad things look. Since everything's settled, I've been contacted by several veterans advocacy groups who want me to speak about my experience. They want to use my story to educate service members about their rights under the SCRA and to push for stronger enforcement of those protections. I've done a few talks, and every time I'm amazed by how many people have similar stories. Not exactly the same, but variations on the theme. Deployed service member gets taken advantage of by someone back home who thinks they can get away with it because their victim is overseas and can't fight back. Some of the stories are even worse than mine. I heard about a Marine whose wife emptied their bank accounts and abandoned their kids while he was in Iraq. A sailor whose business partner stole the company while he was on a submarine deployment. An army sergeant whose landlord illegally evicted her and sold all her possessions while she was in Kuwait. The SCRA is supposed to prevent these things, but it only works if people know about it and if violations are actually prosecuted. Too many service members don't know their rights, and too many people who violate those rights face no consequences. That's starting to change, partly because cases like mine get publicity and show that the law has teeth. Brenda went to prison. She lost her house. She paid massive restitution. That sends a message to anyone else who might think about taking advantage of deployed service members. I hope my story prevents even one person from going through what I went through. If one HOA president thinks twice before targeting a deployed soldier because they heard about Brenda Hutchins going to prison, then all the stress and fighting was worth something beyond just getting my house back. The irony of the whole situation still strikes me sometimes. Brenda was so concerned about property values and neighborhood standards that she turned into a criminal who destroyed property values and neighborhood trust. Her obsession with control and her petty tyranny as HOA president led directly to her losing everything. If she had just been reasonable, if she had just followed the actual rules instead of making up violations and manufacturing reasons to foreclose, none of this would have happened. I would have come home from deployment, thanked Tom for watching my place, paid any legitimate fines if there were actual violations, and life would have gone on. Instead, she's an ex-convict living in another state with a ruined reputation and no assets. And I'm still in my house, with a great neighborhood president, good friends, and the satisfaction of knowing that justice was served. The legal world has a phrase: hard cases make bad law. The idea is that extreme situations can lead to rules and precedents that don't work well in normal circumstances. But sometimes hard cases make good law. Sometimes an extreme situation shines a light on injustice and leads to positive change. My case led to reforms in how HOAs in California handle foreclosures on service members' properties. The state legislature actually passed a new law requiring HOAs to check military status before initiating foreclosure and imposing criminal penalties for willfully violating the SCRA. It's called the Military Homeowner Protection Act, but people in the veterans community call it the Brenda Hutchins Law. I never thought my name would be associated with legislation, even indirectly. But I'm proud that something good came out of my nightmare. Future service members will have more protection because of what happened to me and how hard we fought to make it right. Tom jokes that he should thank Brenda for getting him elected HOA president. I never would have run if she hadn't been arrested, he says. I was happy just living my life, but somebody had to step up and clean up her mess. The neighborhood appreciates him. For the first time in years, people actually like the HOA. They see it as helpful rather than hostile. That's what it should have been all along. As for my military career, I decided not to re-enlist. The experience with Brenda wasn't the main reason, but it contributed. I realized how vulnerable I was when I deployed, how much I had to depend on other people to protect my interests at home. If I had been career military, I'd be facing deployment after deployment, always worrying about what might go wrong while I was gone. I wanted stability, and I wanted to be in control of my own life. So when my enlistment ended, I transitioned to civilian work and stayed in Riverside. The defense contractor job pays well and uses my skills without requiring me to be overseas for months at a time. I don't regret my military service. It taught me discipline, gave me purpose, and introduced me to some of the best people I've ever known. But I also don't regret leaving. Every person has to decide what's right for their own life, and for me, this was the right choice. On the one-year anniversary of the judge's ruling, Tom organized a neighborhood barbecue. Half the neighborhood showed up, and people kept coming up to me thanking me for taking down Brenda. Apparently, she had made a lot of people miserable over the years, and I was just the one who finally had the resources and motivation to fight back effectively. We grilled burgers and hot dogs, the kids played in the street, and for the first time since I had moved to this neighborhood, it felt like a real community. That's what an HOA should create. A sense of community, of neighbors helping neighbors, of shared investment in making the place better. Brenda had created the opposite: fear, resentment, and isolation. People were afraid to talk to their neighbors about HOA issues because Brenda might hear about it and retaliate. Everyone just kept their heads down and tried not to attract her attention. Now, people actually talk to each other. They cooperate on neighborhood projects. They look out for each other's homes when someone is away. It's what I had hoped for when I bought the house, and it only became reality after Brenda was gone. Steve, whose security cameras provided the crucial video evidence, upgraded his entire system after the case. "I figure if my cameras can help catch one criminal, maybe they'll catch more," he said. He even offered to help other neighbors set up their own cameras, and several took him up on it. The neighborhood is probably one of the most surveilled suburban streets in Riverside County now, which has the side benefit of deterring regular crime too. As I write this, sitting on my back porch looking at the San Bernardino Mountains in the distance, I feel a sense of peace that was absent for a long time. My house is mine, truly mine, with no threats hanging over it. The neighborhood is healthy. Justice was served. Sometimes bad things happen to good people through no fault of their own. That's just life. But what matters is how you respond. Do you give up and accept injustice, or do you fight back with everything you have? I chose to fight, and I won. Not because I was special or particularly skilled, but because I refused to accept what was happening, and I had people willing to help me. That's a lesson worth remembering. Individual courage matters, but community support and professional expertise matter too. Nobody wins these kinds of battles alone. I had Tom documenting violations and providing testimony. I had Steve providing video evidence. I had Robert navigating the legal system. I had Captain Williams sending me home. I had JAG providing legal support. Every single one of those people was essential to the outcome. So while this is my story, it's really our story. A story about a community coming together to stop a corrupt bully. A story about the legal system working the way it's supposed to. A story about justice delayed but not denied. And ultimately, a story about karma. Brenda tried to take my house through foreclosure, and she ended up losing her own house to pay me back. She tried to profit from my deployment, and she ended up in prison. She thought she was untouchable as HOA president, and she lost everything. Sometimes the universe has a sense of poetic justice. Sometimes the people who try to hurt others end up hurting themselves worse. Sometimes the system actually works. This was one of those times, and for that, I'm deeply grateful.